Hello everybody and welcome to another tier list video. And I'm going to make some people mad in this one because I was very selective about which worlds I included and why. And I think that's going to make people go, why isn't this one in there? I want this world to be in the tier list video, but it's not. So, and also, some people are going to immediately confuse this with another tier list I did where I just judged fantasy series maps. Not doing that here. This is fantasy worlds, meaning how do all the elements come together? What do we have in total accumulation of the fantasy world and where I value it on this tier list. So after I just quickly edited this whole list and added a couple more maps I realized I didn't have in there in the first place, let's go ahead and jump in and judge fantasy worlds by a whole lot of factors. This is going to be about magic systems, history, utilization of the landscape, like just so much coming together. How does this fantasy world as a complete creature immerse you as a reader? That's what we're doing. I'm going to say a lot of things that make a lot of people mad. I'm going to be brutal. I'm going to be unforgiving. I'm going to touch the camera lens. I know that'll make some people angry too. No, I'm not going to do that. I like my camera too much. First up, let's just get it done. We have Middle-earth, and we're going to drop that in the S tier. It's Middle-earth. It's got a fleshed out history, magnificent lore, magic system, characters going all about it, exploring left and right. Very well, like, geographically placed within the story. You can definitely tell where you're going and how the landscape is evolving as like a result, and it does directly affect the story. It's the complete package. It's the god tier. It's the uppermost level. We're just getting that out of the way. I'm going to just acknowledge that. Just going to acknowledge it right away. No problem. And we're going to go ahead and get another obvious one out of the way. Wheel of Time. Gotta put that in S tier as well. It's the only other fantasy world I've come across that rivals in terms of history and maybe lore, but I think Middle-earth does take that point in terms of how the world is built. We also have a lot of character bouncing around interaction with the world there, but there is criticisms with the fact that it doesn't really have a name. You have wetlands, you have Randland, but like the continent itself that we really focus on doesn't have much of a name, and that's like a bit of a criticism I can agree with. I'd love there to be a canonical name, because calling it Randlands or the Wetlands when no one actually refers to it as the Wetlands, who's like not a eel, I don't know, just odd. But that's where I'm putting Wheel of Time for now, though I do think it has flaws. I'm blind to them, and I refuse to acknowledge them. Now we have Forgotten Realms. If you like your classic fantasy worlds, Forgotten Realms is going to be one you really, really enjoy, because it kind of embodies everything that every author who was inspired by Tolkien created. I mean, it's not as deep as Middle-earth, but there's so much sustenance to it. It has a lot of the same features and focuses, so I don't blame it in any way, shape, or form for being what it is. It's just, I don't know, it's weird to call a world predictable, but the magic system here, the characters, the quests, the journeys, the involvement of the world in the story, everything just feels kind of predictable. There's nothing about this world that draws me in deeper or wows and amazes me. So I like it, but I'm actually just going to drop it in B. It's good, but I don't think the Forgotten Realms world is very special. And while I do really like the series because of a lot of nostalgia feels I have, I got those nostalgia feels in me, I acknowledge that it's also fairly generic in terms of fantasy worlds. I'll amend to that. It's probably the best generic fantasy world because so much has been added to it. It just doesn't ring special to me. And that's as someone who has nostalgia glasses for the series, and that series itself has a special place in my heart. So what's that tell you? The histories are there. The lore is interesting. The character moving around the world is good enough. And I don't know, the sustenance level for me just isn't entirely there, if we're being totally honest. So yeah, I'm standing by my B tier, and if you disagree, I don't care. Now we have one that I think is going to be pretty special here, and that's Broken Empire, a dystopian future of the world, which Wheel of Time is also, but more directly so for Broken Empire. And I think this does that version of fantasy where it's us, but in an apocalyptic fantasy future, which is interesting, extraordinarily well. And Broken Empire, I'm actually going to put in A, because this is the first time I'm going to bring this up, but the level of just character from the world itself really plays into the story. There is a feeling of being in this. The atmosphere of Broken Empire really comes through. And the fact that it's this post-apocalyptic landscape really matches the story and vibe. Like, this is the actual history of the world playing into the narrative quite nicely. And you can look at it and just go, oh, that's Europe. Like, it is Europe itself. And it all comes together in like really like the perfect formula. I'm going to give Broken Empire a perfect formula ranking here and call it A. It's not the biggest. It's not a true historic, monumental fantasy world, which is the only thing really preventing it from being S tier, but it has a lot of character. I would say even more character from the world and histories itself than we get from one of the S tiers I have up there. Not going to specify which, you guess. And I don't know, I really do appreciate it. Even though I don't love Prince of Thorns, I really do love Prince of Fools. And the more I've gotten into what all of this is, it's just beautiful. Now it's time for controversial opinions. Harry Potter world, on surface level, has so much like flashy, interesting stuff to hook you in. It is a well-decorated world. It is also just our world, but there are so many flaws once you start questioning things in the wizarding world that I can't put it very high, especially because J.K. Rowling has made it worse. There is a decent amount of wizarding history we've been given little snippets into, but those snippets are rarely, if ever, craftily woven into the actual Harry Potter story. Instead, we get them in these like blog posts or tweets and things like that. And it's just like, why am I learning about your world this way? That's not the way I want to learn about a fantasy world. So while there is a decent amount of flash and a okay amount of sustenance to the wizarding world in terms of taking advantage of piggybacking off of reality, J.K. Rowling did not reach the full potential I feel like the wizarding world could have had. There's attempts to do so. We have now like other wizarding schools and other continents we're getting more information about, but Harry Potter itself, the series, the actual stemming up from all this reality, could have very much so benefited from giving us more of these other schools. Instead, we had one book where we got like some of the other college kids visiting, if we're calling Hogwarts and wizarding schools colleges, but that's what it felt like. It felt like an away team coming to play at your stadium, and they fucked off. And you didn't get a whole lot of culture stuff. Like, there's really not much. Like, I don't know, and especially when comparing it to another world I'm about to bring into it, which is also just kind of a layering on top of our own history, you really start to see the faults coming through. Now, I'm not saying the Wizarding World is entirely bad. I'm just saying it has flaws, and there's quite a bit of missed opportunity. So for me, Hogwarts is going to fall into C. I know people are going to be mad at that. I am acknowledging there is quite a bit there, but I am one of these dumb nerds who really likes to question and dig deeper. And every time I've tried to do that with the Wizarding World, I just hit bedrock. Like, there's a foot of depth and then bedrock. Now, that foot of depth is a lovely garden, but I hate this dead rock barrier that you can so rarely get past, and I hate it. So yeah, it's a C tier for me. Narnia is going to be a surprising placement, because I know I've made it very clear that I'm not the biggest Narnia fan, and I'm not. I don't think C.S. Lewis wrote a fantastic series. I think it's fine. But the world itself is pretty okay, especially for the time it was released in. This, compared to other fantasy worlds around that time, has few rivals, Middle-earth being one of them, which utterly destroys it, but it is very, very good for what it's trying to achieve, and I think C.S. Lewis, one of the few things I will acknowledge that is extremely good about Narnia is the world he made. The Christian lore added quite a bit of depth, and he was able to use that within his narrative. The way it all comes together definitely serves the purpose he was trying to achieve quite well. I didn't necessarily like what he achieved, but I will acknowledge that his world is well done for what he's trying to do. So for me, believe it or not, Narnia is actually going to go A, because I don't know of a lot of fantasy worlds that reek of Narnia, or at least are doing what Narnia does better than it achieved what it was. So I like this world. I think the magic is not the deepest, but it's neat. I like the characters. I like the way that this world is fairy tale-ish and Christian-ish. Like, they blend together sweetly in a way that I think C.S. Lewis actually should be commended. So for that, yeah, I will go ahead and throw Narnia in the A tier. I think the world, the fantasy world he built, was what it should be. So good job, C.S. Lewis. I'm complimenting you maybe for the first time in the history of this channel. Wonderland from Alice in Wonderland. I love me some absurdism. This is one of the best absurd worlds ever. I debated between putting this and Discworld in here, but I've already done Discworld in a video similar to this, so we're going to leave Discworld out for now, and we're going to bring in Wonderland. Wonderland's awesome. It's wacky, its personality. It might have the most personality in terms of world of any of the ones we're going to talk about here today. No, it just does. It just does. 100%. No denying that. And I know for a fact that you can't really improve on what is accomplished here. The absurdist reality that is Wonderland is exactly what it needs to be. It's not huge or epic. There's not really any histories aside from the little bits we get in the story. And the lore is minimal. So those weigh it down a little in the lens of reviewing a fantasy world. But aside from that, it's kind of just on its own level. So I'm going to give Wonderland an A tier. I'm putting Wonderland up there in A tier. We're seeing Wonderland take down Forgotten Realms. It's a chaotic time right now. No one knows what's happening. But let's go ahead and jump to another one here. Oh, earlier I said I was going to do another one that was just like our world with a layering on top of it, and then I forgot to jump to this one, so rewind in time and pretend I'm doing that right now. Dresden Files. Okay, compared to Harry Potter, Dresden Files is such a better usage of creating a fantasy landscape on top of our reality. We have more factions, we understand them, their movements, their political history, their rivalries. This is how you should build a fantasy world on top of ours. Not even talking about yet the Never Never in Dresden Files. Not even talking about how well the magic system is remaining hidden in believable ways. Not always, but usually. It's so there. And I'm all about it here. Dresden for me, man, when I first started the series, I would have put it in like C and said like, it's fine. But as the series has progressed, it has aggressively moved its way up to A tier for me. And people keep telling me how much even better it gets from here. Do I see Dresden being S? I don't know. I'm open-minded. I rarely say no to a thing before I get into it myself, but I like it. I like it a lot. And while Jim Butcher's personality as a writer comes through most with his characters, that inevitably, as a result, also affects the world. And so you have quite a bit of that personality punching through with just how this almost borderline absurd at times fantasy realm plays through. So good job, Jim. And I'm going to be releasing my interview with Jim Butcher Tuesday. Look forward to that. Cool. Now we have one from my video game homeboys out there, Azeroth. This is from Warcraft, for those of you unaware. I played Warcraft 1, 2, and 3. I never really got into WoW, so I am not up to date, and I'm willing to admit that. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's kind of falling into a similar vein of Forgotten Realms, but better. I think it is better than Forgotten Realms in terms of what it's accomplishing. And I think you can see that with just how devoted so many people are to the Warcraft lore. Forgotten Realms doesn't have these diehard lore fans. Well, Warcraft does. People are obsessed with the history and politics and factions here. And I actually think I'm going to weight it heavier than Forgotten Realms. I need to go through and weight these by which is the best of each of their tiers too. So let me do that. I think, I'm gonna do that. That's it. That's all the changes I need to make. We're done with changes now. I'm about to start reading changes for Dresden Files because I'm quite far through the next book, so changes, boom, reference, big brain. Let's go ahead and jump on over here to Hyrule. Another video game one. I got you, video game guys. I see you. I recognize you. We got Hyrule. Hyrule's good. It's not anywhere on the level like a Middle-earth, obviously, but it's had so many entries of video games taking place in it that we've gotten these layers. My biggest issue, though, is it's maybe the most repetitive fantasy world in terms of major events you'll come across, because it has the Zelda formula, which makes good games. But if we're switching over to the lens of good fantasy world, well, this is a rich and vibrant fantasy world. It's redundant as hell. Extraordinarily so. There's some standout events and some standout storylines, but in general, Ganondorf do some things, Link stop him. Zelda involved, Hyrule. Like that's it. So granted, I've only played like 80% of the Zelda games, but I'm pretty sure that's where it's gonna line up. So for me, I'm gonna leave this in the C. I think it's good. I'm not saying C is not horrible. I just think it's got its flaws, and its flaws are rather large. Westeros! Man, Something that I think is not talked about enough when it comes to Game of Thrones shortcomings is how well they were realizing the world of Westeros from the books, and then they just tanked. I know the narrative had problems. I know there was VFX issues in the last seasons. The last seasons were just bad. But more people need to vocally complain, I can't believe I'm saying this, about how poorly the world was represented as well. Like, geographically, they screwed up multiple times, but just like the history that is given you in the text of A Song of Ice and Fire versus how much of the history and lore you learn through the show is embarrassing. We're going off the books. We're going off A Song of Ice and Fire, not Game of Thrones. Westeros, it's probably the best of the A tier. I'm not going to put it in the S just because of personal preference. I know there's a lot of people who would put it in S. I acknowledge you. Hats off. How you doing? How's your day? I respect you, dog. But it's just not there for me. It's just not there for me. It's in terms of like my enjoyment of learning about the world. I enjoy it a lot, but it's not a world that I want to like actually sit down and just like write pages about my thoughts on, which I've done with Wheel of Time and Middle Earth and one other. And now we have Star Wars. Oh, you dear sweet summer child. I might have probably the most controversial opinion of the whole video here. Star Wars world is D for me because it has all the flaws of the Link world of Hyrule, because it's just repetitive at this point, to the point where there's movies that are just recreating other movies. We also have the issues with it just is a lot of flash, but it's had that bedrock issue as well. Red Letter Media has had a lot of discussions about how redundant and restricted the Star Wars world is, and I agree with their assessment. And on top of that, all these stories that were giving depth to the Star Wars universe were just stripped out of canon a while back and prevent me from actually taking them into account. If those were still in play, this would be bumped higher, but they're not. So I can't, and it won't be. Unfortunate, but it's the situation we're in. I can't count the non-canonical expanded universe stuff unless I know it's back into play. And Star Wars has now told us, like, Darth Revan's canon. Cool. Well, what else about him is? If he's canon, then is all of everything canon? Or no, is it just Revan and we need to rebuild the story around him? We don't even know as fans. Old Republic is just a mishmash of what exists, what doesn't. Old Republic, I would really boost it here, but there's so much confusion and frustration about what actually counts in Star Wars for me as someone who's a fairly large fan, to the point where I have a tattoo of it that I regret. I'm leaving it in D until it's clarified. I'd love to see it clarified. I hope it is. I think the smart move for Disney at this point would be to jump back and do Old Republic stuff and maybe recover, because that would get the fans excited again. But as of now, leaving it D. Fight me. Poppy War World. So a lot to unpackage here. It's not like any world we've really encountered here before, where we've had fantasy worlds that are just layered on top of our own, and we've had fully original ones. Whereas Poppy War is a bit in the middle. It's based off of real events in Asian history, but by no means is it to be taken as our world. And that's, a nice balance. I think there's so much to appreciate here in Poppy War, but it's rather small compared to a lot of other things going on. We really just have one peoples in a region with different factions warring with each other, and we don't know much outside of that, which is a kind of negative. I have to layer there. But there's a ton of culture given to us, a lot of personality from the events of the world. The magic system is still mystical, but definitely defined enough to be intriguing. The lore is becoming clearer, especially the second book. I'm really excited to see how that's fleshed out even better in the third. So I'm leaving it at the top of the B for now. I'm going to put it in the middle of the B for now. I actually enjoy it more than Forgotten Realms because of the generic issue we mentioned there for Forgotten Realms, but I don't know if I can count it higher than Azeroth. I think that's how you say it. It's been a long time since I played Warcraft, because I can't just, I can't discount the rabid fans I'm constantly hearing about for the Warcraft world. So I actually am going to put the asterisk here where I think Poppy War has the potential to explode upwards into the A tier, and remind me to come back and maybe leave a pinned comment after the third book is out, because I'm fascinated to see where that third book's going to go. The Stormlight Archive! So, man, ready for controversial opinion time? We're going to do controversial opinion time. Stormlight Archive has an incredible world. It's rich in its landscape, magic, all kinds of things. Cultures especially, like it's all these flashy, yes, big stars across the board. And then there is one category where it falls demonstrably lower, and that's its history. We have like 2 events we know of before our story starts, which is so barren. Like, that is so little. Like, how is that all we know at this point? That's crazy. So, I like it. It's inevitably tied into the Cosmere, but I can't really count that here. And because it's so high in other marks, up into that one, I'm still weighting it quite high, but I'm not going to give it A tier until Rhythm of War comes out and we get to learn more about the histories, because Brandon has not given me enough history as a fantasy fan and someone who loves learning about fantasy worlds' histories to give it the approval I feel like a lot of the fans want to. Now, please remember, I'm acknowledging that the Stormlight Archive world in so many other categories is just fantastic. But for us to be 3 books into this series and have quite a bit of lore knowledge, but severely lacking in history, is causing this odd unbalance for me as a reader. I really want to know more about the history, and I hope we get that in the next book. We know of like a religious war that happened. We know of the prologue from Way of Kings, but we don't know much in between. We're just given like vague things. And with Brandon also having helped written Wheel of Time, which is one of the most history-rich series that's ever been in the fantasy genre, you'd think this would be something he's excelling in, but for me, he's just not right now. So I'm curious. I love the Stormlight world, but with this flaw, I'm going to hold it down. Sorry, I'm pissing a lot of people off, but don't worry, we got another one coming in. Now we have Mistborn, and yes, Mistborn for me is on a similar level to Stormlight, but it doesn't have that flaw, where we do know a good bit about the history of the Mistborn world, and you could even count the first trilogy as history to the second now. Like, it's got a lot more depth in that way, where we have these time jumps forward, where now we're getting this bigger, wider picture of how this whole landscape is progressing. And of course, yes, I am taking the first and second trilogies into account here, and yeah, Brandon's personality, writing, his care with lore and magic systems is elevating this really high. I'm going to put it above Dresden and Broken Earth, I think. I'm not going to put it above Westeros, because Westeros is just in that transcended level where it's up there rivaling Wheel of Time and Middle Earth in a lot of ways, and I don't think Mistborn's quite broken that barrier, but with his third trilogy coming down the road for it, definitely a possibility. I'm not closing my mind to that, but it's just what I'm thinking right now. And finally, we have the Powder Mage world. And this is getting bonuses for me purely because it's this Napoleonic style warfare. Really digging how different that is right now. Feels just huge in the writing. Like, this feels like a world in a way that many other fantasy worlds don't, especially a lot of the ones down here in the B tier, aside from, well, okay, 2 of the ones in the B tier. So I'm actually going to put this above those. I'm actually going to bring it up into the A, I believe. It's, fantasy authors put so much effort into making their worlds realized. It doesn't surprise me that I have so many in A right now. And I'm going to push it beyond... Yeah, I'm going to push it beyond Narnia, even. I think I'm going to hold it down below Dresden, because I think Dresden's character overshadows, and really just the layering there is special to me in my heart in terms of personal preference, and this is a personal preference list. So yeah, I think I'm going to put Powder Mage right below that, which is a really weird thing to have there. It's like Narnia, Powder Mage, Dresden. What other 3 things will you have lined up like that? Or what other list would you have those 3 things lined up like that? And of course, it is all subjective, and I didn't sit down for hours and stress myself out thinking about this. This is largely just me thinking off the top of the dome, so if I made a mistake, I made a mistake, and that's why the comments section exists, for you to tell me all the ways and reasons I'm wrong. I love hearing them from you. These tier videos always result in the best debates, and I'm looking forward to it for this one. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here during these virusy times. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.